A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangu Shampagian to me. And tonight in the studio we'll be discussing the budget as was presented. Can Museveni's ambitious security plan be integrated? President Yoweri Museveni addressed the nation on Wednesday on security, outlining 9 key areas or key interventions his government plans to implement to deal with the marauding or the growing spate of insecurity in the country. But this being presented after the budget had been presented, we need to ask ourselves, can it be integrated in there? What is actually provided in that budget? I know on many other discussions, there has been an interaction about the budget as was presented. Those key priority areas, we'll try to tune it to the security situation largely and which areas will hurt Ugandans most. To discuss that with me tonight, I have Onapito Ekomoloit. He is Legal and Corporate Affairs Director at Nile Breweries AB InBev. Ona, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you to the...
He's also the president's man, as people have introduced him, and sometimes we have introduced him, having been there before. We also have with us Bill Opio Daniel. He's a lawyer and executive director at Cyber Law Initiative, or Cyberline, which is an organization with a vision to transform and shape the interaction of technology with the law. What is the link? In the budget, we see a lot of government is searching for new avenues for rising revenue, taxing social media. So in the next few days, today is 24th.
24th, yes.
Yes, 24th. So by the time the new budget kicks in, we'll be paying for a charge on WhatsApp, Facebook, and other interactions. We'll also be paying some charge. There's some increment on the 1% on mobile money transactions. How do those interface with the law? Daniel will be helping us deal with that bit. And of course, when you see also all these heavy investments in security, many of them are going to be dealing with technology, and they have an interaction, they have an impact on the budget and their procurement. We also have with us Simon Kasiate. You've seen Simon Kasiate in other capacities, but Simon Kasiate is here. He is the head of communications at the Uganda Electricity Generation Company. Simon, very nice to have you.
I thought you'd say I would be deputy moderator.
Deputy moderator, you might stand
many of your viewers know me more for moderating talk shows here than anything else.
I need to be very careful so that you don't turn into that.
We need to draw the lines very clear that tonight I answer some questions as opposed to ask questions.
Okay.
And I'm glad to be here.
Gentlemen, very nice to have you. We continue to remain a very male-dominated discussion. Sometimes we can't avoid it. Sometimes we could do a little bit more, but we'll see how that goes. Gentlemen, let me start with you. I want to start with Onapito. Onapito, the president addressed the nation on Wednesday, and I posted on my social media platforms that I have to ask. I wasn't quite sure whether the president was speaking to the current spate of insecurity in the country when he finished speaking, and when he outlined his 9 issues he plans to use to deal with security. The question that came to me most is, you're speaking after the budget has been presented. These are heavy expenditure. How do they fit into an economy that is actually not doing very well?
First of all, Charles, I listened to the president's speech in its entirety on my car radio. I was actually traveling, so I had the opportunity to listen. And as usual, you must give your Museveni credit for his attention to detail. You may say it's his version of detail, but at least there are not many people who get interested in things like history, at least from a non-academic point of view. So the fact that he has this meticulous version of history that he wants to impress on the country.
Because he was quoting from page 172 of Henry Morton Stanley's book.
Yeah. So they are clearly, and then of course you could see he was speaking to MPs like a grandfather speaking to his grandchildren. He was really trying to educate them in his view. The issues he spoke about in terms of relevance or implementation, it's possible. I mean, government is government. It can do anything. I don't think there's shortage of money in this country. It's only that money often gets used for perhaps the wrong things. So I doubt even post-budget that government can fail, and security is a classified issue. There's classified budgets. They keep on appreciating. They can have supplementary budgets. So I don't think that's is an issue. To me, the issue, though, I found in the president's analysis was to purely look at solutions without attempting to understand the causes, or at least to explain the causes. Because crime is not new. Crime is as old as humanity. But of course, every country has reasons why a particular trend of crime is prominent. So I listened and waited for the president to try also and explain why he thinks crime has either escalated or persisted, and what are we going to do as a country to address those other elements, the causes of the crime. Because to try and treat crime purely from an eye for an eye, Moses law, I don't think is a complete solution. Look, first of all, the people who commit crime are not necessarily, they are aware of the consequences. They are aware most of the time. They know that if you are caught, you could get killed, you could spend life in prison. So the threats that the president is presenting for the criminals may not necessarily deter them from committing crime. Okay, you can catch as many as you wish, but you can't exhaust. So what is the other way of trying to reduce more criminals?
Just before I forget what I wanted to raise, you listened to the entire speech.
Yes.
And I kept asking myself, did I miss the president at some point? You cannot have your former and longest-serving Inspector General of Police with a cloud hanging around him, someone to the barracks. There is a debate that's emerging now whether he's actually under arrest or detention or just in the barracks where he's supposed to be, and you don't make mention of that.
Maybe the president, as a retired general, was leaving the issue of general to generals.
No, but how do you address the country? How do you address the country on a question of security, which has apparently ensnared your longest serving and most senior, both in the military and in the police for that matter, officer whom you just relieved of responsibility in March?
Well, I guess it's understood that the president did not want to project a state of disarray within the security forces. He would not want to show crime as an issue of the security forces, but crime as largely external to the government and its government's role to stop crime. So his choice not to highlight the former IGP's arrest was
did that surprise you? You have very senior police officers arrested in a wave that started late last year. They are incarcerated. Some have actually been charged of crimes that contribute or are part and parcel of the wave of criminality, or not criminality, the wave of insecurity that the country is grappling with, that you're trying to calm the nation about. And you don't make mention of that? And it's an address to the nation, it's an address to Parliament about the state of security? Did you find that odd? Or would you find that odd? Daniel?
Okay, yes. I find quite a number of challenges with the way we respond to security challenges. And let's first look at the way we responded to the Susan Maragara situation. It's after that that we had like an episode or a crusade of moving towards registration of SIM cards in a certain way, registration of lines in a certain way. And there's actually a considerable amount of money that was lost during a season where there was a lapse in how we could register lines and attend to some of those issues. So now, in the wake of the arrest of senior police officers, that's when we have like a speech that is given by the president on the state of security within the country. So, in my opinion, it looks like we respond after a major event has occurred and has transpired. And then the way we approach and tackle some of these situations, in my opinion, is not the best. If you look at some of the points that the president was mentioning, let's first approach social media. He said there's going to be a form of regulation of social media to be able to remove out, and I'll use the words, to remove out the jiggers out of the feed instead of trying to deal with entire sick fee.
Without damaging
Yes.
the surrounding tissue. That's, I think, the word, how the president has been
Yes.
framing it.
Yes. So when you look at some of the policies we've placed in approach to social media, for example, the Excise Duty Amendment Act 2018, which is coming into force next week, that is 1st of July. But if you see some of the provisions that are introducing the tax on these over-the-top services, that is on Facebook, on WhatsApp and Twitter, the mode of implementation at the end of the day is going to require exposition of some of the personal data, personal information of people, and instead of protecting people from crime that is sometimes cyber-generated, it's going to increase it. If you look at the way that Susan Magara situation was handled, some of these criminals were using phone calls to direct and communicate, and it was hard to trace some of them. So I think the way we're approaching the whole curbing of security, using strict measures on some of the technology that we have existent around, is not the best approach that the state should take.
Simon, let me come to you quickly on this same matter. One, I know you work for government, so you, but you also host shows and have this discussion.
See, when you introduce the subject matter and what I do in terms of my designation, then for a moment I ask myself, so what am I here exactly to contribute this debate? But now that you bring in all these elements, maybe then I could say a word or two, but put your question forward nonetheless.
No, I wanted to stick the question about the president ignoring certain areas in his address is one matter we'll continue debating. But he has this raft of proposals. This raft of proposals, some of the jokes I have seen, some of the questioning or the analysis I've seen so far, is in this country, where a lot of areas you work in the energy sector, either in darkness,
Pitch black.
pitch black most of the time, plumes of smoke from these exhausts of these old vehicles that people drive, dust from roads that haven't been fixed. How do they fit into a solution to security in this country? And I'll add that, were you surprised that the president ignored a mention of this, the crackdown within the security forces?
I'll start with your last one. President Museveni hardly surprises me, considering how long I have been involved in the coverage of news as a journalist. Because as expected, he always do the unexpected. I mean, everyone was waiting to pick the screaming headline of whatever he would have said about the situation as was prevailing and everyone was talking about, which is, without missing of words, the so-called arrest of General Kayihura. He didn't make mention of it, and I kind of expect that he wouldn't, because he always doesn't want to show power. Perhaps it's not a sign of weakness on his part if he, panders to public sentiment or public expectation. So that did not surprise me. However, of course, the morning after, we saw headlines from the two leading newspapers, one telling us the 9 points and the other is 10 points. So now, at this point in time, we're also asking ourselves, were they 9 or were they 10, considering that they were picked by two leading newspapers and given different numbers. But that said...
The good old Linda Nabusai and my friend Don Wanyama and the team that they ran with at State House shared the president's text of the speech. I should add Chris Obore, because it was presented in Parliament.
Yes.
So there is a text, the written text of the speech that we could rely on, or the audio, if people watched, to tell whether they are 9 or 10.
Well, be that as it may, like you rightly said, maybe just to give you the picture, the general picture. For example, much of this, talk about CCTVs, will have to be powered by electricity. And that's where now we come in. We are in a country whose access or connectivity to the grid is less than 25%. It means that about 75% of this country is in pitch black. I mean, if you're going to put CCTV, even in places which already have access or connectivity to the country, like in towns...
What is the actual connection to the grid?
Around 25% now.
25%.
Around
Since
25.
when?
This is maybe as of beginning of this year, it rose to 25%. But before that, we were wallowing between 20 and 23%. The number of connections that are coming in, because of course guys are getting richer, some factories are coming up, and also there is this other hope of, that new projects will be online by the end of this year. Isimba will be by the end of this year, and there's some kind of expectation that electricity will be affordable. That's a debate for another day. But let's look at the CCTV cameras that he's talking about, and of course all this stuff that needs to be powered by electricity. What about places, indeed, like you said, that do not have this access, or even where the access is, you have a challenge with the distribution network. there are places where, in as much as generation capacity is there, but there is no electricity when it's actually needed. And you know very well that crime loves the darkness. I mean, people will always lie in wait, and when it goes dark, they pounce in.
There are places like Makere, Chukoni, those other areas around there, Kasubi, around Kawala area, where power at some stage, it lessens. So you can't have as bright lights as we have in here.
And please note that is largely the cause of the consumers right there. Many of them are on illegal connections. I do not know why the distributor never picks them up. Others lie the distributor that they are domestic consumers. They are connected as domestic consumers, and then they are running small backyard heavy consumption industries like metal fabrication, running maize mills, and all sorts of misdemeanors on the grid. And that in itself tampers with the quality of electricity you get. But be that as
but you know, the honest consumers in that get caught in that same way. But we will be discussing the budget allocation and how these fit in. But as if I'm an honest consumer, I shouldn't suffer because of, I think that would be the incompetence of whichever entity is supposed to ensure that I get what I'm supposed to get by eliminating the illegal connections.
Well, I do not speak for the majority distribution company called Umeme, but what I know for a fact is that they are high up in the activities to curb on these illegal connections where it portrays itself. You've seen them running huge campaigns in eastern Uganda and even major arrests in areas of Mbale where there's prevalent electricity theft and other things. But we can
go back to the question. I don't want you to belabor that. We can go back to the bigger question of if the president is asking for CCTV cameras, even before we go into discussing the procurement challenge that will present, even before we discuss the fact that we installed CCTV cameras 12 years ago, no, 11 years ago, when we were hosting the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit at Chogam, we've been installing at different intervals, different things. I do not know how effectively those work. But if your connection is 25%, which is at the upper limit, and that is concentrated around these urban areas, the president said the camera would have followed you at least up to, if you're in the village, where you take the turn off, where there is no power, will have been able to pick you up to the last point and will say, this is the motorcycle that
but you see, Charles, you've watched CCTV footage of someone vandalizing a car. You have no mechanism of identifying this person. Even when you can facially identify them, you cannot know who they are. We'd have a problem with forensics and having fingerprints of everybody across this country.
He said he wants DNA for everybody.
But you see, that is also a long haul. But now, you see, President Museveni here is dealing with symptoms. He doesn't really look at the cause. Like Onapito opined earlier on in the conversation, the major cause of this crime, in my humble view, is because of the high prevalence of unemployment. Because people are willing to take a very small amount of money to kill a life. If he doesn't answer the question of unemployment, this crime, no matter how gizmo you get in terms of curbing at the tail end, you will not avoid it. Because unemployment will drive people into desperation where they are willing to do whatever it takes to earn a little back. Now, he's been talking on one hand how he intends to solve the issue of unemployment by having affordable electricity to attract investors to come here, set up shop and industry, so that all of us who are educated, and even those who are semi-educated or not educated at all, can have something to do in the value chain of these industries. If we manage to do this and give Uganda reliable and affordable electricity and be able to attract the kind of industry investment he's talking about and create these jobs, perhaps then that will become a better and more believable solution towards averting this kind of crime he's talking about than talking about CCTV installations in places where you don't have enough electricity to cover the place, in my view.
Ona, do you want to come in back on that issue?
Yeah,
a lot of these CCTV cameras that actually security relies on to attempt to follow is privately installed. If power is still as expensive as it is, if in the budget you did not announce that procurement of some of this equipment is going to have a waiver on taxes so that they can be cheaply accessible, because if Onapito installs CCTV around your house, there's a higher chance that you help your neighbors pick up footage on your common path. If Daniel here also had CCTV installed, either at your office or at your private residence, you help because there are places you can go to and pick this this footage. These are issues that were not addressed in the budget. The government is desperately looking for every money it can find from everyone and from everything. That's why they're taxing social media and everything else. Is there a link?
Well, to be fair to the president, I suspect, I know there are alternative sources of power you could use to power these cameras in any part of the country. I mean, you could have batteries, high strength batteries, you can have solar. So even areas without power grid definitely can have CCTV cameras. So that's not a big deal. And I also know that the president likes to talk about his credentials, which certainly speak for themselves in terms of fighting bigger crime. I mean, the wars, LRA, Karamjong, and all this. But unfortunately, these were largely political. For him, unfortunately, these were largely political crimes. But as Simon has said, the crime, much as some people are trying to say it's also political linked, I think it's fundamentally economic, you know. The underlying factor is money. You know, most of these kidnappings and what, there are people who hire others, and the common denominator is they can give them money.
Even those who kidnap themselves.
Even people who may be alleged to be within security systems who are being used to execute these things are also looking for money. I don't think they are doing it from a spiritual point of view.
No.
So until when, generally societies that have higher levels of income disparity also experience higher crimes. Even in the developed countries, neighborhoods where the poor live have higher crimes. Neighborhoods where the rich live have lower crime. So invariably,
do you think
people who are income depressed will always be prone to
do you think, Mr. Napito, that those two issues, security and money, were addressed in the two major speeches that the president has given back to back? Actually, I can stretch them to three: the State of the Nation address, the budget speech, and the speech on security.
Well, I listened to the speech, I think, within Serena here. Again, the budget, unfortunately, is heavy on government intentions at macro level. And of course, there are stated intentions to even put income in the pockets of the ordinary people. The theme of the budget itself was industrialization, and ideally in a country that is still heavily agriculture dependent, the majority of the people can only be uplifted if you industrialize based on using agricultural products, and they will have ready market for their products. Some of the educated will be employed in industries, but there is no clear mechanisms for achieving that. The president, for example, again did not focus, and often doesn't focus, on market. He had a very beautiful idea where he said he would like to galvanize youth in groups of 5 to open maize mills. Because there's a lot of maize now in the country, I think the prices of maize are going to be depressed heavily. So the best thing would be to process this maize, and young people will create employment because they are owning maize mills. But the question is, where will the posho go? If you do not address that question, it's a non-starter.
Well, the president has
it's a non-starter.
The president has repeatedly come up with very beautiful
because,
ideas,
for example,
including the parish model, the 4-acre model, all sorts of things.
So you needed, for example, to start by saying, within government's control, how much posho is being consumed in institutions that are financed by government. Can you make that the anchor for developing the posho industry and stabilize prices? Because if you don't stabilize prices, you frustrate farmers. The guys who are running those mills will eventually have no raw material for the mills. They will also get frustrated. So it has to be much more
let me come to you. You've had back-to-back major speeches by the chief executive officer of this country, who is the president. You start with the State of the Nation address at the opening of this session of Parliament. Ideally, that is supposed to be an audit or an accountability for the year ended. You have a budget speech which presents projections for the coming year to give direction on where the government intends to move for the next 1 year in as far as allocation of resources is concerned, but also in sources of the monies that are supposed to run the government for the next 12 months. Then you have a president who says, give me time to actually come and address you on the state of our security, because you have had all these kidnappings, you have had murders, you have had assassinations, you have had all sorts of things happening in the year ending. And you walk out and say, wait a minute, did we have an audit? Did you have an accountability? Did you have a projection of where we want to go into the future? If you looked at the last two speeches, the budget speech and the speech on security, I see many areas that have an interlink. Where your money is coming from in your budget and where you want to put it and how you fit in these other issues. You take.
Firstly, I have some issues with the budget. For example, when you look at the first thing that has been placed at the forefront is works and development. But then the next thing in line is on interest. That means we are spending so much on our budget trying to pay loans, both external loans and internal loans. So when certain
Be careful, the president warned the owners of this station. They continue saying we are choking under them. The burden will do something.
They have a disclaimer that views expressed on their
No.
platform.
The president can have his views, but if we're dealing with facts, we're dealing with facts. Actually, the loan repayment and debt servicing is top of our budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's quite alarming in my opinion. And then there are those key major factors or sectors that I feel should have a little bit more to be able to enhance some of the projects that are intended. That's why at the end of the day, we have a situation where we are trying to audit something that we started without having understood the nature of what we were dealing with. So let me give an example. We are now looking at security, but some of the modes of trying to attend to security, we want to use drones, we want to use CCTV. But then if you look at the allocation that is given to the ICT sector, it's one of the last. It's about 0.2% or 0.5% if you were to draw a graph and divide up the budget framework for the year. So how do we intend to achieve it when we have placed a very minimal amount of money to spend within the year on ICT and innovation and technology? I thought if we're going to use drones or CCTV cameras, we should look within and not look without. Because the moment we look within, we're going to end up in a situation where the following year, we have again a lot of loans to pay because we are borrowing money to be able to import perhaps some of these things, and we fail to look within perhaps the drone companies that we have within, or the CCTV camera
Wait
companies.
a minute, Daniel. The internal drone companies that manufacture drones, that are innovating new drones that have not been innovated, or would you want the money to have gone into ICT for the procurement of the already existing drones from wherever they come?
I would have wanted the money to go within the ICT to be able to enhance the companies that are operating drones within the country, instead of importing drones from other entities. But we would leave private individuals to be the ones to do the work of importing the drones and operating their company, such that this money that is allocated to the ICT sector is used to boost what is already happening within the economy instead of looking without.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm afraid we need to take a quick commercial break. Thank you very much, the Honorable Stephen Basaliza. You reminded me that we're discussing security when we have had the passing of retired Chief of
Prisons.
Yeah, Commissioner General of Prisons, Joseph Etima, who passed on, and he was a commissioner. He was also a commissioner at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. He passed on. Thank you very much for that reminder. Yeah, he passed on yesterday.
Commiserations.
Yes, and of course we didn't talk about those interesting developments in both Zimbabwe against apparently a target on President Emmerson Mnangagwa yesterday at a rally in Bulawayo, and also the new darling of the Horn of Africa, Eastern Horn of Africa, President Abiy of Ethiopia.
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Abiy. He's been all over the place giving out these very nicely colored jackets to our president here, to President Kagame, and trying to create some real reform in Ethiopia, and then an apparent attempt on his life we will blend in a few of those issues as we move along with the discussion. Bernard Mpeirwe is watching us and says, I appreciate the President's initiative to suggest solutions to the security problems, but I can assure you he has challenges to do with human rights. For example, on the issue of not covering the head, some people have acute allergies that they need maximum warmth when riding. Secondly, some people are in tinted cars for their own privacy. One would reason you and say, why should it be known to everybody that I'm in the car? Remember, I may also be feeling insecure for personal reasons. I need to travel undetected. I appreciate the President, but let's dig deeper to find workable solutions. That's Bernard Mpeirwe, I think he's in Lovaga.
Bernard needs to be informed that the President's official cars are not tinted. If you've cared to look, when his convoy passes by, you can actually see him.
Yes.
With more like, with almost...
They are tinted by the
the President's convoy is heavily tinted.
No, the President's actual car is not tinted at all. And you can actually tell when he's in and when he's not. When there's a flag, then he's in. So
no, if you care to look carefully, you can actually see him seated in the car.
Absolutely.
Yes, you don't even need to look at the flag. You can see him seated in the car because the car is not tinted.
Another one is reading a newspaper and you can tell whether it's the Red Pepper or the Daily Monitor. In there.
Or the East African.
For that matter.
Let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll be picking up this discussion. Trying to look at the budget and its allocations and the President's speech on security. You're still watching the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing the budget, which shortly after its presentation, the President gave a major address to the nation on the state of security, and asking the question, do you think that the President's ambitious security plans can be integrated into the budget, which is struggling to raise every little coin that they can possibly put together to run other projects of government? We have Simon Kasiate. He is Corporate Affairs Director?
No, Manager.
Corporate Affairs Manager.
I'm not yet like...
Corporate Affairs Manager at the Uganda Electricity Generation Company. Limited, UEGCL.
Managers where they generate electricity are more powerful than directors where they generate beer.
Let's look at the consumption of the products which we generate.
You're in the business of making people happy, so
we refrigerate
their business, and so this guy can actually frustrate your business if he's not generating enough power.
These customers have it warm sometimes.
Daniel Bill Opio is a lawyer and executive director at Cyber Law Initiative, or Cyberline, which is an organization seeking to link the law and technology. And also have Onapito Ekomloit, he is Legal and Corporate Affairs Director at Nile Breweries AB InBev. Gentlemen, let's come back to this. When these speeches are given back to back, there should be a link. In other societies, there will be a string that ties them together because they're speaking about the same things. Simon, I started by asking you the question about, you're talking about CCTV cameras, you're talking about flying drones, you're talking about, and Onapito says there are other alternative forms of powering these CCTV cameras, so they do not necessarily have to be integrated to the national grid.
No and yes. Yes, of course there is alternative source of electricity, and what we mainly deal with in this country is hydro, the traditional one that we have always known. And hydro has its advantages over other forms. For example, the much talked about alternative to hydro is solar. And you know that recently we launched a 10 megawatt solar plant in Tororo, another one in Soroti, close to where Onapito comes from. But you see, there's only so much you can link to the national grid from solar because of its quality and also its stability. The engineers will tell you that power coming off a solar grid is not as stable, and the quality is not the same as hydro, which is consistent all through. So there is a stabilizing effect it has on the national grid. But that said, I mean, even to look at it from a rudimentary point of view, you take a drive along some of these avenues that are lit with street lights from solar generators, so to speak. See the intensity of light and the quality of light you have as opposed to light coming in from hydro. There is certainly a disparity. Now, let's assume that...
I thought you have technology where you can actually... The Soroti plant, the Tororo plant feeds into your grid,
yes.
And that grid sends out a consistent, especially for those, for higher generation, they send out a consistent quality and quantity of power.
National Water, for example, will tell you that the moment you have highly contaminated source of water like Lake Victoria, the more you contaminate Lake Victoria, the more they've got to invest in chemicals to purify that water for it to be the quality of being drunk right from your tap or to be used. Likewise, the more you have this intermittent and low quality power feeding into the grid, the more you've got to put in quite a lot of stabilization effect to make it come off like a stable product that we enjoy. Do you want to incur that cost? We already have to incur a huge cost from the huge loans.
Can we afford that cost? Because the whole question is on the cost. Daniel talked about the cost
budget.
of the budget and where date
And
payment and servicing appears on the national priorities
as number one.
The other major priorities, of course, the energy sector, because we need power. We've been waiting anxiously. One, you promised us that once you get Bujagali onto the grid, we shall the cost will go down.
No,
it hasn't gone down.
we never promised that.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Let's get the record
No,
right.
whether you
We
said
said
it-
when Bujagali comes online, the phrase load shedding will be a talk of the past. And you will agree with me that from the time Bujagali came online, what we have may be called outages, but it's certainly not load shedding, the way load shedding is described.
Beyond
Load
semantics,
shedding,
beyond
load
semantics,
shedding means that
Is a schedule?
I have 3 glasses of water for 4 guests. And at any one time, one of us must have a glass and the one of us must not have a glass while the 3 of us have. So you say, okay, fine, in this round, the
So
3 of
you
us
have 4 guests.
You have 3
You have
glasses.
3 glasses.
Uh-huh.
So for the 4 guests cannot drink at the same time.
Yes.
Because one, because there is you need to take back one
Now
glass.
you want us almost take Simon put him to, look,
Now what we have are 5 glasses for 4 people.
but the biggest problem with power right now, at least in a place like where my village is, where power goes off maybe like 10 times a day, who is controlling either the transformers, the poles, and all this? That's the biggest problem now. There are a lot of collapsing of poles, collapsing. I think either the poles are substandard, the transformers are substandard.
Where you come from on Apito, you have this tradition called bush burning in the dry season. When they go burning,
rainy season, so there's no bush
no, but before they burn to the bushes in the dry season.
And they burn the trees.
No, the poles, electricity poles are not spared because they are wooden. So they burn them. I can show you pictures here from good or northern Uganda and all that. No, burn the bushes across. So the poles collapse. Now, whoever has to go looking for which pole failed, because when one pole falls, it has got a cascading effect on the supply to the next side.
Well, the other
So,
day,
but also,
the president
needless to
visited
mention,
a factory of someone who says they are going to make concrete poles. Maybe
that would be a very huge whatever. But suffice to say,
Can I just
just
come
on what Apito just said, I thought I could make an adjoiner. Without a doubt, and without trying to sound defensive, we've got a huge challenge in having the distribution system up and up to the standard.
So,
in as much as
Simon,
there is a lot of tremendous steps taken.
Are you putting it to our viewers tonight, as an official from UEGCL, that there's enough power in this country to make load shedding a question of history? That there's no town in this country that is suffering scheduled or regular power outages that...
As a result of not being enough from a generation perspective. Yes, there is no such a thing as load shedding. And why so? If you go to the Electricity Regulatory Authority website, which is our regulator in the sector, they will tell you that we have an installed capacity in this country of over 950 megawatts. Do you want to know what our peak time demand is? In other words, the amount of electricity this country uses at peak time, that is between 6 p.m. and midnight at this particular time?
Tell us.
It is less than 600 megawatts.
You see? So there's
Meaning there is that extra 350 megawatts that is not consumed.
So you're trying to give us a guarantee that these CCTV cameras will be powered by the national grid, that will not have a situation where they say, there was no power, so you can't recover images from...
There may not be power, not because there was not enough. I always give this example wherever I go to speak. That when you walk to your favorite takeaway, Tipsy for that matter, and they tell you, oh sorry, we've run out of chips. That does not mean that the Irish potato grower in Kabad stopped growing them, or there are no Irish potatoes. No, there could be a truck full of Irish potatoes stuck in Ruera, has broken down for some reasons. Or the manager at Tipsy did not envisage the kind of clientele that would come in and so both not enough for that particular day. From a generation perspective, we have a higher installed capacity of electricity. And I hasten add, we are increasing it. By the end of this year, you'll have an extra 183 megawatts from Isimba coming online. By the end of 2019, there will be 600 megawatts coming in from Karuma. That's also coming
You're adjusting the launch times, huh?
No,
We were promised Isimba would come on board in August, and August or by October. And that Karuma will come on board by December.
Well,
that's the promise.
From the generation perspective of those two projects, August and December this year, respectively, for Isimba and Karuma, those generators will be able to run. The question is, will you be able to transmit the electricity from Karuma to Kawanda? Answer is no, because there are challenges with you, the landowners, in granting way for the Uganda Electricity Transmission Company to build the pylons.
You're trying to get us lost in translation.
No.
So, Charles, that's why I think we are not doing justice to other proposals by the president. I think the raft of proposals, some of them were quite intriguing. And I think overall the biggest challenge they will definitely present, given the history of how government has operated, is the issue of corruption. Because if you are going to have...
It's a procurement bonanza.
Yeah. So I could just see some people might have even influenced the president's choice of what solutions. So you now have car tracking mechanisms through e-number plates. Of course, car tracking is an old system, but it's very expensive. So who are the guys who are now saying this is the solution? And is it really the solution? And of course, the president was cautious already also to know that there was a huge privacy, almost a human rights issue involved. If somebody is going to watch and see people's cars where they are going, and are we not going to at some point to have some people trying to play politics, to say we want to monitor where political opponents are going to meet and in their retreat and know what to do with them. So it's a very attractive
supplier for fluorescent helmets.
Daniel is the lawyer. He will help us out.
But given the way procurement has been handled, you may have a lot of fights. You may have substandard equipment being brought in. So I hope the president will also be cognizant of the history of procurement by government. It has not really been up to scratch.
I am actually hoping that someone is going to, provide accountability for those 2007 technological procurements. We procured BlackBerry phones, we procured CCTV cameras, we procured other scanners and other things. And
flowers for this city, remember, there was beautification for this city. It was also a huge procurement. Do you see much of what's left of? There were flower pots that were gathered at
the flowers were planted. The flowers were planted. The trees along Entebbe Road were planted, and then you guys who put power lines go and cut them down.
What about the flower pots around around this guy that has the Independence Monument?
Daniel, two things. One is the human rights thing which the president touched about. You are trying to implement all these. One of the major concerns has been you've been chipping away at especially the law on privacy. You have, through the Interception of Communications Act that hardly anyone talks about, you have, which is a key thing that you can snoop into how people are communicating privately, which came following that attack on, was passed after the attack at the Lugogo rugby grounds, World Cup 2010.
Yes.
Now, the second thing I'd like to speak about is, yes, the cost of doing these things, the legality of doing them, and you might talk about what has been talked about a lot, which I think your team will also be raising issues with, which is the Excise Duty Act. Yes, or the charges on these other forms of communication, which the president says want to be following. And now you can talk about your other things on social media. We want our young people to continue using social media, but we need to be able to isolate who is sending what messages.
Okay. What you should know about the state currently is that we don't have a law that is protecting data and privacy on some of these tech platforms. So the Data Protection and Privacy Bill is still a bill in Parliament. It's easy for us to pass the Excise Duty Amendment Act It's easy, of course, to pass the act that increases the stay of the members of parliament within parliament. It's easy to pass any other law, but some of the laws that I believe the government is aware would try to limit some of the operations are laws that take quite some time for them to be passed into real law. So we remain in a gray area where we don't understand what are the parameters of perhaps interjecting on privacy calls to determine which kind of transaction is taking place between one individual from another. But issues of privacy, let's look at the Excise, since the second question was about the Excise Duty Amendment Act. Now, the manner of implementation of a tax on a social media user, there are use cases that other countries have looked at. Let's go to Hungary, let's go to Argentina, let's go to Germany and France. In 2014, Hungary tried to tax social media users. But one of the major challenges that the OECD looked at was the fact that at the end of the day, people had to expose a lot of personal data for that taxation to be implemented, and people's privacy was being violated. On top of that, too much exposure of personal data was exposing people to cybercrime a lot. So the government abandoned the idea in 2014. The BBC broadcasted a lot about that, yes, in Hungary. Then in 2014 still, France had also come up with a proposal.
Just hold a moment there.
Yes.
Some of the proposals,
Yes.
The government is interested in a measure to curb crime, is interested in knowing, one, yes, social media usage, who is using what, where. When you add electronic number plates to be able to track a particular vehicle or motorcycle or car, wherever it has moved, you have illuminated, what do you call it? I think you had the right word, helmets.
Yes.
Numbered, illuminated. How do you, and now you're saying something about Hungary, following this same route, for it to look for taxes, but actually end up exposing
Yes.
Individuals to threats of criminality. Yes.
Yes, so actually the use cases don't just stop with Hungary. And Argentina tried in 2013 to introduce what we call the Netflix tax, in that if you're procuring a movie or a series or a song, you had to present certain form of data. So most of the people that were actually paying that kind of Netflix tax ended up having situations where their privacy was violated to the core and cybercrime started to increase. So every time we see states trying to handle this whole aspect of taxing social media, most states have failed at the whole attempt. The reason as to why most states fail at the attempt is because of the absence of a tax residence or a tax jurisdiction. So you'll find that Facebook,
for the companies that are providing these services.
Yes, owned in the United States of America, has leased its license to an Irish holding, which leases it to another Bermuda holding. So at the end of the day, you're trying to look for the tax residence. You're looking for the place where they've established their physical premises, because originally the tax principles are designed for a brick and mortar kind of economy. But to have a new economy that doesn't present the brick and mortar. And where we are faulting is that we are trying to look at it as a goose laying the golden eggs. And then in an attempt to squeeze out as many eggs as possible.
As many golden eggs as possible.
Yes, we shall kill the goose. What has been improving?
But how do you kill a goose that is not within your...
Now, let me give you...
Your remit.
Yes. So the European Union has acknowledged that taxing some of these companies is quite a hard thing. So they looked at one thing. These guys just derive value from the fact that our population uses these social media entities. Yes. So they're like, we're going to tax them on the value that they're deriving by virtue of the adverts they make, within our territory, how people respond to that, despite the fact that they don't have...
But government is not going for that, because government is not charging for Google ads. Government is not charging for Facebook ads. It's charging you, the user.
Yes, and that's very problematic. Actually, if you look at it deeper, that's double taxation, because we already pay for it. When you subscribe for internet data, you're already paying some form of tax. Yes, when you buy that smartphone, you're paying a tax. So actually, if you look at the way some of these companies, tech companies, have been advertising some of their services, is that we are selling a phone, this kind of phone. It comes with WhatsApp, comes with Twitter, it comes with Facebook. So some of those platforms have been used by big companies to be able to front some of their agendas.
And if you needed to download an app onto your phone,
Yes.
Whether it is WhatsApp or Facebook on the phone or Instagram or Uber, Taxify and others,
Yes.
you need to have some data on your phone.
Yes.
Yes. Which data you have already paid for.
Yes.
And you've been taxed for.
Yes.
And then government wants to tax that again.
Again. So that is double taxation in itself. And if you're to look at the human rights angle, it's blatant violation of human rights. Article 21 of the Constitution prohibits discrimination on the basis of economics plus other related issues. So you being able to place a tax of 200 shillings, there are certain people that aren't able to afford the 200 shillings to be able to access a platform for which already they subscribed for by virtue of downloading and by virtue of paying the normal internet data. So some of these things are becoming so hard to realize. And then the European Union, why I'm trying to bring in the European Union is I'm trying to point that there is a better way Uganda can approach the whole aspect of gaining some advantage from these high-tech companies. Because last year alone, about $5.4 billion was made by Facebook on only adverts. And Uganda contributed a big percentage of part of that revenue that was raised, within East Africa.
I'm afraid we need to take a quick commercial break. Ona, could you kindly hold it and Simon hold it? We'll take a commercial break, but I'll take these messages. I think this is from Agaba Bills. He says, good discussion. With all due respect, President spoke with less authority and confidence on new remedies for security. He outlined like academic thesis. I agree with Ona. Urban crime is directly related to the economy. With CCTV, the president will have an opportunity to watch gross, I think, unemployment on 3D. As a country, we must fix youth unemployment, or we shall watch on and as these desperate youth eat us. Another, someone else here says, Bernard is coming back to us. He says, today I was trying to have a deep look at the role of RDCs in the districts on security issues, vis-a-vis their capabilities in terms of technical skills to do that work. I think it's high time the president puts a committee to vet RDCs on technicalities before they are appointed. We need competent RDCs in the districts because these are presidents in the locations. By perfecting this, the president won't have to run to every location. Bernard, well, Bernard, the president's office has issued so far 2 lists of RDCs. The latest I saw from Esther Mbayo, the Minister for the Presidency today, saying, RDCs, please, Mukakane, you relax, we'll communicate again, which means that stay at your stations and continue doing your work. So the question of the RDCs and the list is not yet resolved. And if you noticed in the list that was issued initially, there is a committee, what is it called? RDC something, the one that has a secretariat, an RDC secretariat, where my friend James Tweheyo and Sister Akarod and Martha Simwe are members. Another, Burita Joseph is watching us and says, according to the World Bank, all of Africa should be investing 64 billion annually to meet electrification needs of the 650 million people that lack access. All we do currently is $4 billion. So Kasiate and his counterparts across the continent are doing less than scratch the surface. In the investment model, they should put education and innovation first. 4, if you are going to rely on Chinese engineers to build you a dam, the same way you depended on the West and the Soviets, you will never transform really. Expatriate human resource is expensive. Thanks for the show.
Tremendous. He's got incredible ideas, only that they are not in tandem with the current times.
I'm actually very concerned that you say you have capacity to produce, to generate 950 megawatts today. We have only capacity to consume 600. You're going to double that to about 1,800?
We're going to add another 783.
Another 783? That will give us 1,600 and something?
The National Development Plan 2 says that by 2020, access to electricity in Uganda should have moved up from 20%, where it was in 2012, to 30%. That's by 2020. It also says that we should have moved an installed capacity of 2,500 megawatts by 2020.
And you're trying to deliver on that part.
We are
of the
trying to
generation.
deliver on that part.
How
But
it
also
gets
you-
evacuated?
No, but you've heard also the president talking about all these huge industrial parks that are coming online.
Let's
They
come
will
and
need
look at them in the
electricity.
budget.
The standard gauge rail will also need
Let's
electricity.
come and look.
other-
Let's
other
come and look at them in the
emergencies.
budget and how the provisions are. After very short. Welcome back to this last
venting
segment
and all
of the
this.
Fourth Estate. Ona, we're back on air. Ona and Daniel, we're back on air. And we're trying to create a link between the budget and the security measures that the president spoke about. And of course, I would love to look at the trio of major speeches that the president has given together to be able to create a link, a necessary link. Someone is watching us, and he says, that boy seems to know his things about social media. I need to read this.
Social media taxation and where it has applied,
Yes,
where it has failed.
I'll pick up and Daniel, I think they are referring to you. You're the youngest
This is
person
the job.
on the panel.
He's
Yes.
the only boy. The rest are male adults.
This boy in Fourth Estate is so informed about social media. So that's a compliment to you, Daniel, even if someone has called you a boy.
Thank you.
The president should recruit him to say it. But look, I just wanted to, while I agree with these concerns about the social media tax, which generally are shared by the whole country, of course it's not going to happen. To me, taxes, in my future life, if I can, I want to specialize in trying to follow tax shillings, if I could, just as an advocate for accountability. I don't see any problem with this money being collected if at the end of the day it benefits those whom it is being taken away from. Not in some theoretical way of infrastructure. For example, can you have a rebate system whereby after the end of the year, somebody at least receives some credit by way of MBs, by way of, just to show that they contributed to this tax bracket. But if you are taking away as a punishment, that's why people are resisting. Because look, by using social media and all these other applications, we actually use money, sometimes without even mining. So it would be such a pleasant surprise if somebody just surprises you with a credit because you are a taxpayer.
That would be like government doing you a favor.
Don't extend it to
Not doing a favor, doing the right
Allow
thing.
me to respond to-
Daniel, let me come to you in a minute. The concern is, at one level, if government is desperate to raise as much money as possible.
To do what? That's what I'm saying.
Yes, that's the question. To do what?
pay back loans. They are
Must
borrowed
you?
for buildings and other things.
I think Daniel and his team intend to go to court over this Excise Duty Amendment Act. There's another group that has also threatened to go to court. CSBAG, the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, ran campaigns before the passage of the budget.
lost.
Yes, the passage of the budget. Very many other people raised concerns. One, it is illegal to double tax an individual. But number two, you can't be looking to raising money and creating that middle class that will invest their savings if you're taking every money they have out of their pocket. How do you reconcile those?
Yeah, I'm just saying that often those protests, government will win. But I'm sorry to say by hook or crook, it often wins. But I'm saying even when it wins, there should also be a middle ground of saying there must be other direct ways of pleasing those whom you are taking away money from. Not this generalization
What
of saying
is the cost?
we are
what is
taking
the
to a
cost of
pool
that?
for the benefit of the country.
What is the cost of that
If,
victory?
just hold on.
What
If-
is the cost of that victory to the economy, to the health of the economy? Because you can.
I'm
short
actually
term-
more concerned with the cost to the individual whom you are taking money
Yes,
from.
but you see, the cost to the individual translates into the health of the entire economy.
Which is
because
okay,
the
but
individuals you're
I'm-
taking from is myself,
Yeah,
Simon
and
here,
often the health
Daniel
of the
and yourself.
economy
Yes.
can only be understood by the individual. I've just said, if at the end of the year, these people who are spending 500 a day and some is being taken 200, 1,000, if they could just be pleased and surprised with a credit of 20,000
You're about to give
of
us
MBs.
a mode of saving of a popular musician. We'll not go into that. Yes, Daniel.
Allow me respond to some of the issues he raises. I'm not against taxing social media. I'm against who is being taxed for the use of social media. Yes. Because last year Google paid a lot of money in taxes to Germany, but Google doesn't have a taxable residence
In Germany.
in Germany. And the European Union has noted that they need to gather themselves as a group to be able to approach some of these high-tech companies to make them pay tax for the value that is derived in Europe. I think Uganda is looking at it the wrong way. We should take the matter up as, in my opinion, as the African Union to be able to make some of these high-tech companies pay taxes within our jurisdictions according to the value that is derived from within. And then our intention is to raise about at least 400 billion Ugandan shillings from the social media tax. But then how much are we losing in tax evasion on some of the entities that we've been taxing? How much do we lose? So before we try to raise more from elsewhere, let's first solve the challenge that we already have. We cannot, it's not like in mathematics where you add a negative, get a negative and negative and get a positive when it comes to tax. Here, when we get a negative and add another negative, we shall only receive negatives. So we don't need to tax social media usage. We are going to discourage internet penetration, amongst other things.
It's the conflict I was looking at, because how do you, people need to be able to experiment. People need to be able, yes, you'll have a few abusers of this social media sending useless messages, but there are those who are consulting each other. They're discussing.
I don't agree with you. Say you'll find a few abusers. My experience with social media usage here, where you and I work in Uganda, I think you have the majority abusing it. But,
No, but just on that issue, on this issue,
which again should not be a reason to
abuse
punish
Shouldn't
them.
be a
though.
reason to punish.
it's
Yes.
also important for government to show statistics, a correlation between people who are seen to be abusing and crime. Is there a correlation? I know there could be a correlation, but it's an assumption. It's always nice to show statistics showing that
But I don't think we've also
this
reached those
percentage
levels
of abusers
of
end up
insanity.
committing crime.
I've not seen this level of insanity in Uganda, where people going to commit crime actually going to post on social media. Like this crazy man in Germany who posted on Facebook, invited someone who wants to be eaten, and some people volunteered themselves. They showed up at his address and they were actually eaten, and the German police was mesmerized that they were unable to pick that. So I think the criminals that we have by social media is way beyond their time. I think they act in covert ways that are not the kind of grandstanding that you see on social media.
Yes, no, but now that you talk about it, let me make a declaration of the person I referred to, the person who sent you a compliment that I didn't mention, is Nicholas Kamara. He is on one of the most vibrant WhatsApp groups that discuss serious stuff. It's called Diary of Intellectuals, and these guys want to keep discussing what they think is important stuff. Now you're going to tax them and send all of them into a retreat. You have intense debates on groups like this that sometimes run throughout the night. There's a segment of Team No Sleep members that never go to rest. And they're exchanging useful, important information. And you think, there is a lot of traffic. These guys are too busy. And you find majority of the people on this group are also on many other platforms. And you want to be able to tax them. You want to tax them.
So
You raise an interesting issue. Tackle the problem from the source. Get YouTube if it's an independent entity. Get Facebook if it's an independent entity, taxable entity. Get Instagram is now together with Facebook. That's one group, and WhatsApp. Those are housed in the same place. All these other communication apps, go to them and say, guys, you're generating so much from my market. For the East African community, we have a block of 6 countries, high penetration in Kenya, very good efforts in Rwanda, Ugandans catching up very fast, Tanzania, and South Sudan when it comes on board, and Burundi, of course. Then you say, give us a portion of the money you're making out of here, instead of us. Yes, is that your suggestion?
Yes, my suggestion is that we should approach those very companies, tax those companies, not tax the users, because the dangers that come with taxing the users, I pointed out some of them, is that we are going to expose personal data. And that means that, Charles, you'll be taxed for uploading some of your holiday photos on Facebook. That is why you'll be paying the tax. Then, if you look at the Excise Duty Amendment Act, how it defines the over-the-top services, It even includes virtual private networks, that is VPN. If you remember in 2016, what happened during the presidential elections was that social media was blocked, but people still continued accessing it by virtue of
VPN.
downloading VPN.
Yes.
But now this Excise Duty Amendment Act that is coming into force on 1st of July is also going to place a tax on VPN. That means that you cannot access VPN without revealing a certain type of data. Yes.
So you're looking at it at two levels of threats. One is invasion of privacy, but the other is...
But let me ask Charles and Daniel, in this era of social media where many of you are willfully going there to tell the world about yourselves without a care about you, from posting your nudes to posting the stuff that otherwise people discuss in their bedrooms to everything. Why would anyone then come forward and start crying for, oh, they're going to find information about me? Every time you're trying to upload an application on your phone, they ask you your name, your date of birth, and you willfully give this information. All this information is owned and taken away in servers in Palo Alto and wherever else they are kept by Google and other social media platform holders. I see some kind of hypocrisy.
No, I think Daniel said something important.
Simon, let me Charles, let me respond to
before
Simon.
I'm surprised that social media user is even concerned about issues of privacy, when in fact social media is all about breaking the barriers of so-called privacy.
Simon,
Daniel, you will come.
Okay.
I know that efforts, as you say, the European Union, even within the US, have been made to try and deal with Facebook. These are among the most well-protected entities by lawyers, and serious lawyers like yourself. And I'm sure the Uganda government and even the African governments are choosing their battles wisely. The ability to tackle Facebook, where even Congress, the young man went to Congress and just looking at a young king. I don't think Africa can do anything to make them pay the kind of money.
Actually, now
why can't he become? Why can't he go to the Attorney General's chambers and possibly give advice to government from that level? Perhaps.
Dave Wenner, Facebook's financial advisor, mentioned in last year's Wall Street Journal article, I think on the 12th of December or 17th of December, saying that Facebook is moving towards paying taxes in jurisdictions where they derive value. Yes, because there are certain jurisdictions where they don't operate. Like in China, they don't operate there. So they want to be able to pay taxes in jurisdictions where they derive value. Now, when you said something about people posting their nudes, posting their social life on social media, and then they are claiming that their privacy will be violated by this tax. Let me give an example of a case that was taken to Ireland by Councillor Fred Mwema, trying to expose the person of TVO. Yes. So without such protections of VPN, you get it? It becomes hard for such people who are critics of some of the great social concerns to be protected. So the protection is not generally to look at the huge majority that is generally enjoying its life and updating people about what's happening concerning their lives every day. But the protection is looking at that person that seeks to shape policy, shape information, and some of their views seem not to be the views that the other person seems to, the one that is in a higher power of authority, seems to agree with. So at the end of the day, the taxes seem to be targeting, because it's going to require exposure of such individuals. TVO is going to have to expose who he is to be able to pay that tax. So it's going to become hard to implement.
You will use his usual nom de guerre as he is, an identity de guerre, and continue appearing like that virtual person that he seems to be.
No. I think, Simon, the argument that the argument that Daniel is raising, where I agree with him, you do not sacrifice those few individuals who care about their privacy, but see the advancement of technology to provide for social media communication, because you're saying a majority of the people are voluntarily putting out this information.
Well, I want to take the comfort in the fact that all these social media users and all that are not complaining that their gadgets are unable to be powered. At least what I can guarantee them, that there is enough electricity to power their gadgets and meet their fans. For me, that gives me confidence. It would have been a different story if they were unable to open their phones because they have had, their areas were load shedded because there's not enough electricity to go around the country at any given time.
At the same time, I think government is hitting its head against the wall on this and trying to control social media, and because it's really beyond it, you know. It keeps on changing, and there will be changes.
Changing form, yeah.
And I don't think government just have
Can't
to
keep up the pace.
No, it can't keep up the
No,
pace.
I was
No, it
actually
can't keep up the
thinking that
pace.
both in the budget and in the president's address, there would be a lot more talk about where government is investing its money to generate this knowledge and some of these platforms domestically to encourage these students at, they're very wonderful students at Makerere University, that ICT department,
Yes.
who would be encouraged, and you see that the investment is going in these areas to generate, to facilitate local generation of this knowledge instead of outsourcing it to, because you said there is no Facebook in China because they have a local platform
Yes.
that provides social media communication in China. Is it Baidu or something like that? Gentlemen, our time is out. We need to be able to get out of here.
Personifying that word called government, for me, I think would give me a better understanding of who is this person that's actually thinking the way they are thinking and putting in place these measures, and who is going to implement them. You talked about the president in his speech. Let's look at the person of the president and his knowledge and ability to appreciate and decode social media. The Minister of Finance, same story. So at the end of the day, you may need to say that perhaps one wouldn't be wrong to say that, like when people said, the government will be hitting its head on the wall, but also sometimes it must be somewhere groping in the dark without an understanding of what kind of animal they are dealing with, which is the social media as it is described, and what really they ought to do to benefit out of it. And that's why I think also I tend to agree with Daniel's suggestion to say this may not be something that the government of Uganda wants to go at as a lone wolf in the pack. They may need to go together with, East African community or even the African Union and say, look, let's negotiate, let's have a conversation, let's try to be regulatory. Otherwise, when Facebook hires lawyers and you compare that to the people you choose to be your attorney generals and solicitor generals, then you'll have a mismatch in terms of how you're going to be able to discuss these things. And that's with all due respect to the holders of these offices.
I was about to ask for that disclaimer. No, Joe Sia is watching us from Montana and says Uganda's GDP continues to endure a whooping 27.5% penalty as a result of poor links to and from external markets. Just the compounded effect of having no railway connection to the sea alone, once fixed, would unlock over 1/4 of our GDP, as well as a GDP growth acceleration of 11% year on year. The proposal to deploy a predatory tax regime is not a sustainable solution. Security can be addressed by improving economic performance. Gentlemen, we need to get out of here. Our time is pretty much over. So I need to run across the table and ask you your takes. On security, the raft of proposals that the president makes to fix security, can they fix security?
Look, again, as I said, the president has his credentials on security, so you cannot entirely dismiss his ability to fix. But I think this is a different type of security. It's dealing with, as someone said, you are having a generation that has nothing to lose involved in part of this crime. They are like...
You mean because he has impoverished them so much?
That's
why they have nothing to lose?
Him impoverishing, there are a lot of social and dynamics that have taken place, family breakdowns and what have you. So you have a group that is like white hands rushing to light. They don't really care whether you are going to catch them and fry them. So the threat of imprisonment, the threat of what, does not necessarily deter them. So you need also to look at the root causes of that kind of behavior. Because it's going to multiply. So you'll have to fill up prisons and what have you, but that kind of population is going to be there.
Daniel, I need to come to you. I don't need to restrict you on what you're going to say as your closing comment, please.
So what I'll say is that some of the policies we take as a state are self-defeating. When you look at the basis of the social media tax, I only found a paragraph of, is it a report from the Parliament Committee that deals with the budget? It was one paragraph, and it's the only available policy that was trying to establish why there should be a social media tax. And the reason was that it's unfair to people who use normal messaging and normal phone calls, because we use a different kind of spectrum to communicate when you use social media. So I think the challenge is that we've not taken time to understand the nature of the digital economy and the nature of the technologies we have to be able to address the situations. It has taken the European Union, countries like Germany and France, 4 years to be able to come up with a solution and a policy was come up with, I think, about 3 weeks ago on how to tax some of these
Social media.
entities. Yes.
Thank
For
you.
us, it took us 1 month.
Thank you, Daniel. Simon.
Linking to the budget speech, of course, with the loan repayment being top on the agenda, it's unfortunate, but that's the bitter reality that we are a generation that is in this country at this particular time when these huge investments, especially in infrastructure development, are being made. When you see a government borrowing 85% of 1.7 billion US dollars to build a dam like Karuma, borrow close to $600 million to build Isimba, it cannot be the same generation that's borrowing this money that will enjoy affordable rates of electricity. Sadly, it may have to be our children or our children's children, and that's the price we've got to pay as compatriots of Uganda at this particular time. So whereas, yes, I would
You
want
need
to
a
give
job at the Patriotism Secretariat, don't you?
not quite. I think where I am, I can comfortably handle this job, which is already a handful. Mine is just to say, look, what would want to deliver to you is that, yes, government has borrowed money to build these dams, would rather build them, deliver them to Ugandans in time, within the technical specifications as agreed, and of course, within the budget, without going back to collect more money for this. And at the end of the day, we then can effectively use the electricity generated to bring value to ourselves, as opposed to using electricity, the public good that it is, only for consumption. I would love to see all of us in Uganda consume this electricity in such a way that we benefit from it in terms of, engaging it to do some kind of production somewhere, or at least enabling us to eke a living out of it. I feel very heartwarmed when I see, in far-flung areas that have some bit of electricity flying over their head, a mama tapping from it and refrigerating drinks, or at least, cooking with it, people doing these kind of backyard industries of metal fabrication and the like. For me, that is an enabling way of using electricity, as opposed to many of us who consume it for the sake of consuming it, thinking it should be given to us free. You go to a bachelor's house, he's been running his fridge the whole 24 hours of the previous day. When you open it, the only thing that is there is half a 5-liter jerrycan of water that has been consuming all this electricity. Or you find folks who, when they are buying flat irons, they do not look at the wattage, but they look at the shape and size. Oh, this one looks very good. It has steam and all that. When he wants to buy a refrigerator, he wants to buy one like he saw at Onapito's house of double doors. He doesn't have an idea the wattage of what it is. And yet, on the other hand, when they're going to buy cars, they always look at the back side of the car to see how many cc's is this car. So until we also appreciate that our electrical appliances consume electricity and ought to be looked at carefully in terms of efficiently buying those that are within our means, shall we be able to enjoy the electricity that we have in this country.
Simon, I also think that it is your responsibility as people engaged in the energy sector to deliver to us affordable electricity. We use it the way we can, provided we can afford to, we can pay you without...
When you say affordable, Charles,
yes.
what it is compared to what?
Affordable is, people have raised questions. It's not your area, of course. People have raised questions about the how
the tariff comparison between
tariff,
Kenya and
yes,
Uganda
tariff
and
comparisons, how effective the Yaka meters are, if they don't overcharge us, and those many other things.
Beyond being affordable, now we're in the midst of the World Cup. I don't know when I'm watching the finals and Senegal is playing against Germany. And the TV,
Just ensure that your neighbor who's coming from a club does not knock the pole right outside your home and destabilize connection. Because much of these outages are caused by our own misdemeanor.
Our time is out. Our time is out. My colleague,
which are rotten,
my colleague Julius Barigaba has written an excellent article on the president's attempt to address security in the East African, if somebody can pick up a copy for themselves. And it's run together with Andrew Mwenda's analysis on Kaihura's wars. So when people have been asking questions about Kaihura and saying we are not telling them the real story, those stories are there actually. They're being told by the same media.
In the East African?
In the East African, of course.
Wow.
In the East African. And one of the most exciting stories, I think, for me, in the East African is the story of these warring parties in South Sudan. That godforsaken country. Riek Machar and Salva Kiir finally met after so many years in Addis Ababa. But the meeting, I think beyond the room, it's no surprise that there was an attempt at the Prime Minister's life shortly after he had brokered this meeting between Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. but the details are there somewhere.
Allow them to box each other.
Our time is out, and as the president was speaking, there was a killing. I think the killing had happened just the day before, and the president spoke the next day. Roland Mugisha, a lawyer, who was hit at his gate by iron bar hitmen. He was buried in Rukunjiri the other day. And of course, Betty Namboze remains in hospital and also in police detention. Apparently, we thought that thing was a joke of him trying to lift off the later Biriga's cape to poke him into the face, which passed off like a joke. But she's remaining in detention and raising a lot of concerns. On matters of generals, we'll leave those to the generals until the situation is a little bit more clear. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Simon Peter Kasiate, for making time for the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you very much.
It's an opportunity to always harp about my favorite topic, which is now electricity.
Which is now electricity. Your favorite topics keep changing, eh?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I say, which is now electricity.
No, we're watching very closely whether you actually be able to deliver Isimba as promised. Karuma as promised. Thank you very much. Daniel Bill Opio. We'll be watching very closely, both us here and our news teams, to see how you progress with your petition against the Excise Duty Amendment Act. And Honor, thank you very much for making time for the show. Always. Thank you very much to you all, our viewers, for joining us tonight. And always, thank you very much, especially those of you who gave us feedback, and each one who watches this, stays up late to watch this show. And of course, the production crew that stay up late to deliver the show to you. From me, it's a good night.